This is your Class 5 Extra Topics on the heroic age of Antarctic exploration for 20th century history. At the early point of the 20th century, there was still a lot of exploration of the world happening. The North Pole wasn't reached until 1909, and the South Pole was reached right around the end of 1911. And so there was this massive scramble for these people to go and show their courage and explore these unknown and uncharted territories, particularly in extreme weather, where they could really prove themselves as men. And there was a large push by Europeans to be a part of this movement. So Europeans were the first ones to get to the North Pole, and right after 1909 that those folks had gotten to the North Pole, the world turned their eyes to the South Pole and to Antarctica. And so what I'm going to talk about specifically today is the Terra Nova expedition, which is one of the great tragedies of this age of exploration that was happening. This expedition was led by Robert Falcon Scott. He was British, and it was really a race to the South Pole. Ronald Amundsen was a Norwegian who was starting off at the same time, and Scott and Amundsen actually saw each other at the beginning of their expeditions. They went different routes, and Amundsen was vastly more prepared than Scott was. Robert Scott took a lot of ponies and a lot of dogs, but wasn't willing to sacrifice his animals to feed his dogs and his men, which really leads to his downfall later on. One of the great stories of this expedition, which started in 1911, is that they're camping out on one of these ice floes, and they wake up to the sound of ice cracking. And the ponies and some of the dogs are on a different ice floe now that the ice is cracked. They're separated. And so these men are trying to get over to the ponies and bring them back so that they're all together when orcas start to circle. Now, orcas, for those of you who aren't familiar, those cute little free willy whales that are actually quite vicious and quite hungry at this point. Now, Scott and one of his comrades, Oates, kept very, very detailed records, so we have these really amazing stories, particularly with these ponies trying to jumping across these ice cracks to try to get back to where the men are camped. And these orcas are circling and circling and hoping that one of the ponies will fall off and they can eat them. And they start bumping the ice, and ponies start falling in and are being eaten alive by these orcas. So you can imagine the terror, freezing in the middle of what is spring for Antarctica. The weather is terribly cold. Ponies are shrieking in fear. These orcas are circling and spouting. And Scott actually ends up taking a pickaxe to 6 of these ponies who have fallen into the water so that they will not be eaten alive by the orcas. And so it's a very powerful story, just initially the suffering that they've had. Like I said, Scott was poorly prepared. He didn't plan well, and his plan was not executed well. When they were on their way to the pole, Oates noted that if they were beaten by Amundsen to the pole, they would come home with their tails between their legs, is the direct quote, because he said they had made so much noise about their expedition. They had photographs and press conferences and press releases all about how they were going to make it to the pole and bring all this prestige and glory to Britain. And so there was really this sense of, we have to beat the Norwegians there. When they finally do get to the pole, they see the Norwegian flag, and chaos kind of breaks out for Scott. He says, what was the point of enduring all this for nothing? We will have accomplished nothing. This was all a waste. At this point, there are just 5 of them left. They start out with 14 and kind of break off and turn back as they go. So there are just 5 of them left. There's Scott, who's leading our expedition, Oates, Bowers, Wilson, and Evans. And they're pretty low on rations. The animals are weak, if not dead, or starving. And they're slowly making their way back. Now, Evans falls through a crevice, and injures himself really, really badly. and 2 weeks later he ends up dying when he falls through another crevice. So we have these 4 men left who are starving and freezing. They have frostbite. They're barely conscious of anything. And in March, they are trapped in a blizzard. We don't know if it's the 16th or the 17th because at this point Scott has lost track of dates. Their food and supplies, it's all nearly gone. And Oates stands up in the tent and he says, "Just going outside, and I may be sometime." And they realize this man is sacrificing himself. Oates is going to sacrifice himself with the hope that we'll make it. And obviously they try to dissuade him, and he can't be dissuaded, and he even walks out of the tent without putting his boots on. And he just goes. And his body is never recovered. He's never found. But Scott does note that this is the bravest act he's ever seen and that it should make all Brits proud. But that doesn't change the fact that they're still starving. Now, the odds have increased for them since there's only 3 of them and they have what would have been Oates' rations, but it's still not good. And the men do die. Nobody survives this expedition. They were at the pole, we know, on January 17th of 1912. It took until much later in 1912 to actually find the bodies. They were able to locate the tent and the bodies of Scott and Bowers and Wilson, and they were there in the tent, huddled together. So we know that they did starve or die from exposure. But this, again, these men were considered heroic. This was what this age of exploration and this great heroic exploration of Antarctica was about. And these men embodied that. This idea that we're going to go into a dangerous landscape, into a dangerous world, and accomplish something great. It was very much reminiscent of the concept of Columbus and how he's so idolized in the New World, because he went out into the world unsure of what he was going to find and accomplish something great. So there you have it. The heroic age of Antarctic exploration. If you've got questions or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in class.